Good morning, America. Good afternoon, Africa and Europe. And good evening, Asia. And good night from Alicante in Spain to those attendants located at this moment far away in New Zealand or even in Australia. My name is Manuel de Santes. I serve as a professor at the University of Alicante in Spain. I served time ago at the European Commission and at the European Patent Office, and I'm also a member of the academic board of the Fundación Fide. This session is recorded and it will remain available for all the Congress participants, who, by the way, are more than 5,000. My role here is just to open this pre-conference, welcoming you. So let me, in just 30 seconds, thanks very sincerely on behalf of Fide, the organizer of this magnificent conference. Most especially, I would like to thank to my friend Senem Barrio from the University of Santiago de Compostela and the legion of people who has devoted so much time and effort to organize this 24th European Conference of Artificial Intelligence. Thanks indeed also to our moderator, Professor Laurent Monderieu, Professor of Intellectual Property Law at the Bocconi University of Milan in Italy, member also of the academic board of Fide, and director of the Global Digital Encounters on the future of intellectual property in the digital era. Encounters which bring together thousands of attendants every month. Welcome, Laurent. Laurent Monderieu has done all preparatory work together with our three panelists and the splendid team from Fide, mainly Alvaro, Cristina Rivas also, and Carmen Hermida. And finally, thanks also to our panelists, Margaret Chen, who is here, Cornelia Kuteler, who is not here yet, but I guess she will be able to join, and Nuria Oliver. Thanks very much for having accepted to team today, for all the preparatory work, and for having the courage to address a very, very complex and hard topic. In fact, the foundations of the development of artificial intelligence are at odds in the United States, in China, and in Europe. How to find common issues to build the new era? This is the very question for today, and no one better than Laurent Monderieu to conduct this excellent team. Laurent, you have the floor. To all of you, enjoy the meeting.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor De Santes. Thank you, Manuel, for this introduction. Thank you to Fide, to the Fide Foundation for pooling with ECAI for this splendid conference. We, jointly with our top-level panelists, we have the honor to to set the scene before the formal inauguration of the ECAI conference. And we intend to set the things, basically to set the scene in the three main social, legal, and economic models that exist for artificial intelligence. Is there room for marriage? In this very case, artificial intelligence leads clearly the fourth industrial revolution, but technology brings questions to society, questions to the economic models that we operate, social questions, of course, legal questions. And is a marriage possible between social, economic, and legal questions? Is a marriage possible with the orientations taken by the United States of America, by Europe, and by China in their development, either government-oriented or not, of artificial intelligence? In order to reply to these super important questions, we have the honor to have with us an exceptional panel under the direction of Professor De Santes. We have with us, in alphabetical order, Margaret Chen, who leads and is the honorary president of the China Club Spain, is active in promoting innovation investment between China and Spain, is active in being member of many academic boards of various institutions, including Harvard University, and as such paves the way for bridges between continents. We also have with us, and this is a big honor, Nuria Oliver, who has an outstanding career as a scientist. After all, artificial intelligence in our debates today put together scientists, economists, and lawyers to see where we go. And Nuria Oliver is the owner of patents, of 40 patents connected to artificial intelligence, has worked for Vodafone for many years in very senior positions, in director positions, and leads the ELIS laboratory, which is in charge of precisely studying on the development of artificial intelligence and digital networks. Later on, possibly, depending to a connection problem, Cornelia Kuterer, who is director at Microsoft for European and Mediterranean Affairs, will join us. But I would not wish to delay the debate. I would wish to remind our participants that we as a team decided to organize our discussion in the following way. I'll raise various questions with our panelists, and then we will take questions from the public. We have left an immense lapse of time to reply to your questions, because we think that in the horizontal organization of society that now is developing and is actually existing, it is important that we hear the voice of our public and reply to their needs. So I would first raise my initial question to both Margaret Chen and Nuria Oliver. Which actions should specifically be developed in Europe, or can we consider that in some aspects Europe has lost the train of artificial intelligence? I would propose that Nuria replies first, and then Margaret replies.
Okay, thank you.
Nuria, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Splendid panel.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation to this interesting panel. And also thank you to all the attendees for being here on a Sunday. This is a very good question that, of course, a lot of Europeans at every level have asked themselves, and also institutions like the European Commission or most of the European countries. What's the role and what's the position of Europe in the AI space when compared mainly to North America and Asia? To answer that question, I think we need to consider different dimensions when we talk about AI. So on the one hand, we have investments in research in AI and the scientific production of novel methods in AI, where right now the leader in the world is North America, followed by China. If we look at the main institutions publishing in the top AI conferences, like, for example, this conference here, so we find a clear superiority in numbers by United States, followed by China. The second dimension is the innovation dimension. So how many AI-related startups are there? How many AI-related patents are happening? And there we also find a dominance between the great American technology companies and also the Asian companies. So in the top 5 rankings, there is no European company. And then finally, we have the dimension of the use of AI in society and the understanding of AI by society. So what is the index of deploying AI and using AI in companies and in public administrations, and also what is the level of understanding that citizens have about AI? And there we find, again, that Europe is lagging behind, but Europe is certainly taking steps in reinforcing these 3 pillars with sort of like a flavor of AI made in Europe. That would be neither maybe the very market-driven approach in North America, nor the very government-driven approach in China, but something that would be more probably a people-centric approach, right? So the short answer to your question is, right now, when we look at the figures, Europe is definitely not in the first or the second place in any of these dimensions, these 3 dimensions, but I think Europe is aware of this and is certainly taking measures towards changing the situation, while at the same time developing what does it mean to create artificial intelligence made in Europe.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Nuria, for setting the scene in this respect. And I would now wish to give the floor to Margaret, as announced. Margaret will give us, of course, an Asian and more specifically Chinese perspective on it. Margaret, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the organizer to organize this very special event online, which is a challenge. And maybe it is a good thing that COVID has give us an impose to work online, you know. So I'm happy, you know, and honored to be invited to take part of this panel, and very happy to share with Nuria that we used to be colleagues for some years in Telefonica. First of all, I want to say that most of my professional life I developed in US and Spanish companies. So I'm not speaking as a Chinese or representing China in this sense. But starting from 2005, I started to focus on China market and the Chinese development, especially technologically. And so I would like to share my point of view in that sense. I remember that 20 years ago, when I was working in Telefonica, and I was involved in the first mobile payment project in Spanish operator, which is Telefonica. And at that time, Telefonica was number 3 in the world. And the system called Mobile Pay was registered, patented in 80 countries, and China included. And it's a perfect application, even without the need to have a smartphone. That time, smartphone didn't exist yet. However, it failed. It failed in the rollout. It failed in the market campaign. It failed that people didn't trust, and the regulation was over-restricted. And I think that we need to learn from this experience, even though we have had the technology and we couldn't actually to roll out. And then the second year, I worked on another system, which is called Smart Card. Now everybody knows Smart Card, but 20 years ago, it was new. And we studied how to, to promote it and to use it, and in order to establish the infrastructure, and we worked very hard on it, and the technology was almost perfect, but it failed again, and for different reasons. This time it failed because the industry is so decentralized, and it is everybody look at their own benefit, and then nobody want to work together to put an infrastructure together. So now when we come to this time that 2 or 3 years later, China implemented both the mobile, the China implemented first the smart card system, which the government put the readers everywhere. And that was the key point, that people like my mother was retired people, they use the card for everywhere. So now, a few years later, China has entered into this mobile payment. We all know that. And then now China is the most used in mobile payment. And we also know now in artificial intelligence, China has made a big progress. China doesn't lead the technology, but China lead the market who use the technology, who apply the general use, the civic use of technology. And so we just look at the outcome, and we really need to think where Europe is, where Europe should go, and with which velocity, because technology goes very fast. And I don't think we lost the train. I wouldn't say that, because I think the artificial intelligence, even though it started in 1950, but the real takeoff is only a few years. And I think there is a huge opportunity and a huge areas that both from the company, B2B, B2C, and then the infrastructure side, I think there are lots of aspects that Europe can take the lead. And now, but I think Europe really need to reflect on the other development in the previous years, and to make sure that the regulations and the governance is actually doesn't block the development. And the market, we all know that Europe is consists of many countries, and each country, each local, they have local government has their own regulations on the data, data protection issue. And but I think it's the time that we all should get together and to get a common playground, and to make this technology to take off fast.
Thank you very much, Margaret. And this was I think both of you really set the scene and permitted us to advance to another issue, which is connected to your replies. And there I would address again to both of you, but perhaps starting with Margaret, how to compare developments in the USA, Europe, and China. So how can we find metrics on there? How can we really evaluate what is felt? You mentioned conferences. We know that there is the WIPO patent scope that also shows that China is running very fast. How would you compare the developments for the three of them between Europe, China, and the US?
Thank you. Definitely, I think that the US leads the development in high end of the technology, and the US is the country that has more indigenous invention of the AI in technology-wise. But we all know that China has a huge data market. Let's say China collected a lot of data. China, as a country with the most populated country, has this advantage that has lots of data. In comparison, that if Europe wants to do that, we need to unify all the countries, and we have to have the same standard, and then we can do the same thing. No? So China, in the later few years, I think in the last 3 or 5 years, China has now developed most user end market. And China has, today you can go to the train station, they just, scan your face, and you pass, you don't have to actually get out your passport or your ID. And this will be very much discussed in Europe because of the data protection issue and things, but China has done it. That's the point, okay? So, and I think that China definitely is positioned in the user end, in the mass market development. And maybe you can say China has a more relaxed data protection law, or you can say maybe the user and user accept to give away their personal information. Instead, they get more protected and get more security. I just make this an example of COVID-19. China have had no problem roll out these APPs for people to be informed of whether you have the dangerous situation of COVID-19 when you go to a supermarket or when you go to a public facility, and the people value more the protection than the privacy. This will not happen. Is not happening in Europe. This is not a criticize, but I think this is the reason that China has been taking leap forward in applying and in using the technology for the benefit of the people who live there.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much, Margaret, for for your views. Now I would wish to turn on to Nuria on the same question. Please.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I mean, I want to make a few points. The first one is not every technological development means progress. And to me, progress means an improvement in the quality of life of people, of all people, without discriminations, also of the rest of living beings on the planet and on the planet itself. And it is clear that a lot of the use cases of AI by a handful of institutions, be it a handful of technology companies or governments, does not necessarily mean progress to people, to society at large. And that's, I think, the European stand on AI, which from my perspective, I think is a meaningful stance, because I think Europe has always distinguished itself as a region where human rights and the societal, so the public good are sort of like preserved, and they're trying to be maximized. And I think that's the core of the reasons why there is so much debate of AI in Europe, because AI is a discipline which is transversal, which has the potential of being applied on every single domain in our lives, and it is being applied into use cases that have tremendous impact on people's lives. For example, we have the recent case in the UK of grading all the students by an algorithm which wasn't even an AI algorithm. It was a very simple algorithm, and the impact that has had on all of the students' experiences. So when we are using algorithms, more so being AI, machine learning algorithms than not, to recommend judicial sentences, or to decide whether someone is giving a job or not, or to decide whether a student is accepted in a university or not, or to recommend a medical treatment, we do need to make sure that there are certain guarantees of non-discrimination, of non-bias, of transparency, of interpretability, of accountability that are met, because those are the expectations that we have in our society to make sure that indeed the development means progress. And I think that's the European view on AI. The difficulty, I think, for humans to understand the implications of embedding AI systems in our daily lives is the fact that an algorithm that is software can be deployed very quickly and applied to millions of people, and the consequences can be experienced very quickly by millions of people. Which is very different from, say, having, you are unlucky and you get a very unfair judge, but it's just one individual that might affect the lives of a few people. And there are methods and protocols and procedures for you to appeal that decision and somehow, feel that you are being treated in a just way. But that doesn't exist right now with algorithms that are opaque, that we don't know whether they are being applied or not, and that can potentially be applied to the entire population without our knowledge. And I think those are some of the most important issues around the development of AI. As I mentioned at the beginning, in terms of scientific production, North America clearly dominates together with China, but I want to make a very important observation. It's not that North America dominates, it's that US companies dominate. So the scientific progress of a field that is at the core of the fourth industrial revolution, that is changing life as we understand it, that is changing societies is not being defined right now by academia. It is being defined by industry. The #1 publisher in NeurIPS 2019, which is one of the top conferences in the world on machine learning, the #1 publisher with over 160 papers was Google. The #2 publisher with roughly half of the papers was MIT. So if you add up the number of papers published by industry, Google Brain, Facebook AI, IBM Research, Microsoft Research, and so forth, it actually adds up to more papers than the top universities in the world, like MIT or Stanford, or Carnegie Mellon. So this is also something very important that we need to be aware of, because besides pharma, maybe it hasn't really happened in the computer science field. Having such an important discipline whose state of the art is being defined by industry, who of course doesn't necessarily have the public interests as their main interest, because they are responsible to their shareholders, and they need to make profits, obviously. So I think that's another very important topic, which is not even a geographical topic, it's more an sectorial sort of like topic, where the field right now, even the research in the field, is being dominated largely by industry. And that was one of the motivations why we decided to create ELIS, the European Laboratory for Learning and Intelligent Systems, to really strengthen the scientific research on machine learning, which is a dominating area within AI right now, in Europe, but also carried out not by industry, by research institutions that are largely publicly funded.
Many thanks, Nuria, for these explanations. And actually, this brings us to the role that that basically players other than governments and companies may give to us on this. But now, what can be the role of governments in your vision, from Nuria's point of view and from Margaret's points of view? What, if you want so, what should governments do to without hampering the growth of AI development? So AI development is led by companies. Universities are partly joining, but these are really companies that are leading. So what governments should really do for, let's say, an efficient use of artificial intelligence for economic development, for society, for citizens? What should really be the role of governments? How can this materialize?
Yeah, so I think there are two very large stakeholders that have an important role to play. On the one hand, we have governments and public administrations. On the other hand, we have civil society, foundations, and NGOs. From the perspective of governments, of course, governments can certainly pass regulations and legislation to sort of like define what do they understand by progress, and to incentivize technological developments that actually are going to end up guiding us towards such a progress. And that is what I think the spirit of the white paper that the European Commission published on AI was, where they were drafting some ideas on possible regulation on AI to have certain guarantees of non-discrimination and on transparency, for example. Another very big role of governments, which is largely unexplored right now and has become evident during the COVID-19 pandemic, is the digitization of governments and the use of AI by the governments for the public interest. To be able to do that, given that today's state-of-the-art AI systems are data-driven, you need to have a data mindset in governments and public administrations, which means also you need to have the technology and the infrastructure to actually have high-quality data being captured in a systematic way, so it can be analyzed and it can be used to make better decisions, understanding that this data is a reflection of reality. And we have been struggling with this throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. We've been struggling with data not being consistent, with having a lack of data, with having different definitions of what a case is, and then suddenly the number of cases, changing and so forth. So I think that's another huge area. which is the area of digitizing public administrations and realizing that they can leverage these tools to transition to a more evidence-driven, data-driven policy making, and also evaluating their policies in a quantitative way through the analysis of the data. And then we have civil society, NGOs, foundations, and I think they have a huge role to play. As I mentioned, ELIS, for example, is a network with some of the top scientists in Europe working on machine learning. It has hundreds of fellows who are supposed to be really distinguished scientists in their fields within machine learning or within AI. It has established 27 ELIS units in 15 different countries and Israel, and it's been a movement of the civil society, of the scientific community, as a response to realizing that Europe, was lagging behind, and that excellent European talent is not choosing to stay in Europe or to work for European institutions. But also NGOs and also society at large can also act as great validators and as great auditors of the use of these data-driven methods in society. There are a number of, well-known cases of algorithmic discrimination that have been brought to light by the civil society. For example, the ProPublica study on the Compass judicial system in the US. So I think society and the civil society has an increasingly important role to play. And I will close by saying that society at large can only play this role if it understands what we are talking about. And that's why education is so important. Unfortunately, the knowledge of the average citizen about AI is very low. And it's still the image of what we see in science fiction movies, a Terminator robot, some kind of a robot doing something, and that's not what it is. It's the algorithms that are in Facebook and in Google, and all the services that we use. So we really need to invest, and this is a role that governments can do in collaboration with the private sector. We need to invest in educating society. And I really like, for example, the Elements of AI program in Finland, whose objective is to educate a certain percentage of the population on AI, because it will only be when we understand what we are talking about that we will be able to ask the right questions, and that we will be able to actually make the right decisions about how we want to leverage this technology to make sure that it is for progress.
I think this is absolutely crucial. Thank you so much, Nuria, for reminding us these crucial issues. Margaret, do you want to comment on this and to add something?
I agree on lots of what Nuria just said. I think responsibility and accountability is very important. As far as the roles, I think we probably, at this moment, we are too much relied on the companies. And the government, I think that the government is always there, but I wish that the new generation of the government should have the digital background to regulate this issue. Because if you don't understand what is the digital world and what is AI, you cannot regulate with your old sense of protection. And this will be a really trauma, for development. And so that's why I think that among the roles, now it's getting important that the NGOs, just like Nuria said also, and the user has to say something about it. The user, let's give an example of this COVID-19 pandemic. If user want to be protected, and so the one who has the virus, who has the right to protect his privacy, but also the user also has the rights to not be infected by some people, that it is greatly affect the public health. So I think that China evidently is on one side of the story. China has controlled this pandemic because of the tough method, because of the dramatic method, and people are not complaining about their losing their privacy. Maybe it's also people never had a lot of privacy before, so that's why it's so easy to accept and for the public health, concern. So I think that we need to take into account of NGOs, because why? Because NGOs has some humanity roles in this issue, and the user end, which we are currently not really taking into account. And also, I think that we are only now in number 1 phase of artificial intelligence, and we're still not in general artificial intelligence and super intelligent artificial intelligence. So, and at that moment, it will be really crucial, the regulations and the governance and accountability. I think this is very important. And I also, as my role, working in this international arena, I would like to see an international communication on this issue and to work closely, because it just, just like the virus, technology has no boundary in lots of sense, has no boundary. So if you are getting across, if some private people from Europe, they go to China, and they need to know that your image can be recorded and they don't ask you, because in China it's permitted. So I think that the end user needs to have this information. They need to know it. Maybe, you cannot change. When you go to China, you follow the Chinese rules. When you go to Europe, and you follow the European rules. And I agree that each continent or each country have to have their own, decision on certain things. But the end user has to know what is their right and what is being, taken their data and used for.
Thank you, Margaret. I think this is a very, very important point, and I would quote the French philosopher Alain of the middle of the 20th century, who used to say that the freedom of the individual stops where his freedom is stopping the freedom of the others. So this is a very touchy issue, and it is understandable in a moment of epidemics and pandemia that freedom in a way or another is to be treated in the sense of the individual interest, of course, but also of the collective interest, which is so important. Before moving on to an additional question, I would wish to raise a question to Nuria on one of the topics that she really loved to study, and on the what she sees as the main economic and labor challenges brought by AI.
Yeah, well, from an economic perspective, a lot of the authors and the studies anticipate an increase in GDP through the adoption and the development of AI, mainly because of productivity and efficiency increases, but also because of the development of new opportunities and new services. And there are estimations, for example, of growing I think it's Spanish GDP, if it was supposed to grow 1.7 points in the next, I can't remember, it was like, say, 5 years without AI, so we an additional 0.8 points or something like that with AI. This wide adoption of AI in the economy would entail a profound transformation of the labor market, in the same way as it has happened in all the other industrial revolutions. Otherwise, they wouldn't be called industrial revolutions if they don't entail a significant change in society. So the main, the impact, so one of the biggest challenges with AI is that because it is transversal, because it's a discipline that you can apply to any field, the impact can happen in any field. And more than a complete automation of entire professions, the expectation is that tasks in most of the professions are going to be delegated to AI systems. So it is very important to train and to educate into working synergistically with these systems that are going to help us in our jobs help us be more efficient, help us in analyze large amounts of data, etc. But we need to know and we need to understand, obviously, how to work with these systems. And we also need to, as I mentioned before, have certain guarantees of non-discrimination, you know, of interpretability and so forth. So the part that worries me is the part related to education at every level. Education at a compulsory level, where I don't think the children today, at least in Spain, I think in China, actually, they are way better than we are in Spain, but they're not receiving the education for the 21st century. It is largely the same education that my grandparents received in the, you know, second industrial revolution. So I always talk about two important set of competences that I think we need to reinforce. On the one hand, I've been advocating for the past 10 years in the introduction of a transversal core subject since first grade called computational thinking, which has 5 areas of knowledge: algorithms, algorithmic thinking, programming, hardware, data, and networks. And I think every child in the 21st century should know about these things. And you don't need computers to teach these things to the little kids, but you can still teach them, you know, using the real world. The second set of competences in compulsory education are abilities that we have as Homo sapiens that have enabled us to survive as Homo sapiens, and that we might be losing, like our creativity, our critical thinking capabilities, and our emotional and our social intelligences. So as important as teaching computational thinking, I think is really reinforcing these abilities. And then we have the second pillar in education, which is workers, professionals. And I think we need to invest a lot in upskilling and in reskilling programs, because AI is here, AI is transforming every single job. And if we don't invest, we have the risk of having thousands of people that are not able to adjust to this new reality. And finally, the third pillar, which we talked about already, is educating society, citizens, so we can make informed decisions and we can be critically thinking about this, but also decision makers and politicians and the public administrations who unfortunately have many times very limited knowledge about these topics. So it is very difficult to make the right decisions if you don't really understand, you know, what you're talking about. So I think those 3 dimensions of education are absolutely a priority from my perspective.
Thank you so much, Nuria. I think that this is crucial. I completely share your views that education is a key issue. We mentioned earlier the issue of COVID and privacy. What is more important is privacy or is fighting epidemics? Certainly education has a key aspect there. But I would also give the floor to Margaret so that she also comments on labor issues, if she wants so.
Okay, I don't know whether you mean labor, you mean the artificial intelligence will replace the jobs of lots of labor, that issue, that's what you mean?
Yes, but also opportunities for younger generations thanks to artificial intelligence. So both ways, not only jobs lost and all the time complaining, but also jobs creating.
I think it's important. We know that today, 26 first most rich people in the world represents half of the wealth of the whole population, you know, so the 3.8 billion. So this means that anything we do, we can affect lots of people, and artificial intelligence is the same in the same way. It can affect lots of repetitive work and lots of basic work, but it also at the same time creates lots of jobs. And it is a question of that we don't create the social, to enlarge the social difference and the social unfairness. And we need to, from the very beginning, from young age, and just to educate the people, the generation, especially the new generations, in order for them to look for different challenge and to work towards future. So we know that there are lots of, even like the driving, it can be replaced, a driver. You think that it's not, but later in the future, it will be even more. You see the translators can disappear and, lots of work, repetitive work. But we also, in the same time, we need to value more the work which needs the personal attention. For example, like the healthcare workers, and that their work should be more valued than today. So this world will change a lot, But I think the technology will go forward, and we just need to prepare the new generations to be, mentalized to set to set their mental towards the future, to work and to study, the new fields in order to fit in this new world, which will be is approaching. It's approaching. So we also need the companies, the entrepreneurs, to be more responsible when they are creating certain type of usage of artificial intelligence, and to be responsible, and to be to look at the humanity development as the first priority, and because this technology can do good and can do bad, we all know that. And so if we don't enforce the accountability, many bad things can happen. It's much worse than what we can imagine today. So I think this is important. Education is very important, and the re-education, because we will have lots of people. They need to be re-educated to do different work, different type of work. So, and also we talked about the regulator. People working in the government and regulate this this industry. They have to have the knowledge, and especially I want to stress the international communication, and it should be open and it should be discussed all the time. I think it's very bad if we are all closed to our own region and we don't need to know the others. And I think that artificial intelligence has no limit, and it will affect us if we don't do it.
Thank you so much, Margaret, for this reply. We have received a question from the public, from actually Piero Poccianti from AI for IA, and I would wish to read this question and join it to another question that I had prepared for our panel. So Piero asks or comments, many think that some users of AI could lead to negative effects. Some users of AI could lead to negative effects on society and people. He thinks that this is not due to AI, but to an economic system that seeks profit instead of well-being. The traditional economy, as Piero says that scarce resources are represented by capital and labor, while natural resources are limitless. Do you think that artificial intelligence can help us change this wrong approach to the production of well-being for humanity and the planet? Or is AI destined to increase a system that is increasing inequalities and the impact on the planet that hosts us? So Piero raises this complex question that I would bring, it's connected with the issue of profit, with the issue of how can technology companies and governments be pushed so that they be more responsible and accountable in the development of AI. We mentioned education. We should mention now responsibility and accountability. So basically reorganizing the economic structure of the world from economic productivism to well-being of mankind. I leave the floor very open to Nuria and Margaret.
Yeah, so that's a very good point, and I think as the person who has a question mentioned, you can have both sides of the spectrum, because AI in itself is a discipline that you can both use it to save lives and to build better models of climate change and therefore be better prepared, or to build models for sustainable energy systems, for example, and use them more efficiently, or you can use them to exploit, people, or supervise, manipulate subliminally human behavior, or supervise workers and so forth. So it is the same algorithms and it's the same technology. So it is us, the ones that are choosing to use it in one way or another way. And that's why I think the role of governments and the role of society is so important, because unfortunately, if those roles don't exist as a counterweight to the roles of companies will try to maximize their profits, because that's what they exist for. They are responsible to the shareholders, and to the board of directors. So that's why it is absolutely so important to rethink their existing regulation and legislation, and to rethink, like many others are doing, including Mariana Mazzucato, the concept of GDP, right? Which doesn't take into account a lot of externalities, doesn't take into account the environmental impact, doesn't take into account the living conditions of the workers that are producing these really cheap, objects that end up in garbage landfills, most of them, and so forth. So I don't think it's something intrinsic to AI per se. AI is a discipline that we can use for whatever we want. But having said that, it is true that, because, as I mentioned already, AI is mainly software and it's mainly computer programs that we can very quickly deploy and apply to millions, of people. It is true that the impact can be accelerated and can be very quickly have a huge impact, right? Both positive impact and negative impact. And that's why it is so important to be careful, around it and about it. As Margaret mentioned, one of the biggest concerns of the fourth industrial revolution and the 21st century is the polarization in the accumulation of wealth and the extreme concentration of wealth in a handful of individuals and a handful of companies. Even right now in the US, the weight of the technology companies and the pharmaceutical companies in the stock market is unprecedented. This has never happened before, that such a handful of companies or a handful of individuals accumulate so much wealth. And a lot of the thinking is that this has something to do with technology, because these are technology companies. So there is this phenomenon called the winner takes all phenomenon, where there is this, as soon as someone is successful on something, has an economy of scale, has a critical, mass market, and they start sort of like acquiring all possible competitors, and they end up having this sort of like de facto monopoly or oligopoly. I personally don't think that that's positive. There is another element that we haven't talked about. It's not only about AI, it's more about technology companies, but it's the issue of taxation, where, as you know, the companies, because they are global companies, they are digital companies, they can be headquartered in places where there's no taxation, or they can do a lot of financial engineering, to have very little taxation, even though they have, massive amounts of profits, something that doesn't apply to other companies that are more in the physical world, right? So I think it's a very good question, and I think it's us citizens who should feel empowered to make sure that we do everything possible for AI to be used for social good, and to make everything possible to make sure that this amazing discipline that is really revolutionizing very important fields, like the field of healthcare, medicine, sustainable energy, education, so it is really to democratize education. It is really, to bring healthcare to remote locations and to developing economies. It is really to make the world, a more fair and a better, place, which is not the case if we don't do something about this.
Thank you very much, Nuria, for your comment on this. And I would, Margaret, do you want to add any comment to Nuria's input to our panel?
I think she said quite complete, and it's I totally agree. I think we should use wisely the artificial intelligence to contribute to the humanity, not just to few rich companies. And that's why, we cannot leave right now the polarized situation like the company and the government. We should also incorporate NGOs and the user as somebody in the system, in this ecosystem, to make sure that the artificial intelligence will serve for the humanity.
Very, very beautiful. Thank you very much, Margaret. I have one question from for Nuria that comes from Girish, who is a PhD candidate in the APIN program, the European Intellectual Property Network program, jointly between the universities of Alicante, Maastricht, and other universities. Girish asks Nuria, do you think Data Trust Project that is having marketable and trade able EU data bank would work? Would Google and Microsoft be willing to share their collected data to these common trusts? So the Data Trust Project. Nuria, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, one of the key assets to enable the development of AI is data, because the big advances in AI have been in data-driven models, machine learning models. So who holds the data holds a lot of power, because that's what you need to be able to train all these models. Realizing that a large percentage of this very valuable data is privately held, there are a number of movements, including a movement in the European Union through the European Commission on creating the framework and the environment to foster data sharing, privately held data sharing for the public interest. And I was actually a member of the high-level expert group in the European Commission on this precise topic, and we published the report in February with our recommendations on how to make this happen. It is a complex topic, it's not an easy topic. And indeed, one of the concepts for enabling this data sharing is the creation of these data trusts, where interested parties can give access to the data in some way, for the public good. I think it's still in a sort of like experimental phase right now. I think we need a few examples of success cases where the value of the data can be shown, and while obviously preserving, the privacy and having a secure access to it, for it to encourage other stakeholders to, to join and to continue to contribute. But it is definitely one of the key elements in this view of leveraging the playing field, sort of like preventing a little bit this winner takes all situation and giving a chance to smaller players, both the smaller companies or research institutions or the civil society, to be able to be innovative and use AI techniques. Because right now, if you don't have large amounts of data, you can't really do much, because these algorithms, need the data to be trained. And this happens in all sorts of fields, including healthcare, for example, where it is extremely difficult, to have this secure and privacy-preserving data trust, or data lakes, or whatever you want to call it, for science, or for the public good. So I'm really keen on seeing how these things develop, but I'm also aware of the complexities. Another approach that is possible is what is called data cooperatives, where basically the model is the model of a cooperative. So you contribute with data, but then all the members of the cooperative have access to all the data. So if I contribute with my data, but everyone can see my data, but I can see the data from everyone else, exactly like a cooperative. So that's another interesting approach that is being experimented in different places as well. So we'll see how it evolves, but definitely data needs to be part of the conversation when we talk about AI, because today's systems are data-driven systems.
Excellent. Thank you so much for this very important vision that gives really added value to our conference today. Now we are entering into the final phase of our meeting, and I would wish to make an open question to not only to Margaret Chen and to Nuria Oliver, but also to Professor Manuel de Santos as director of this program today. We know that artificial intelligence has come out over the last 50 years. The coined word artificial intelligence was created at Dartmouth conference more than 50 years ago. And we know pretty well that it has come out from a circle of basically of imagination and intellectual visions, or gossips on robots and so on, to a real practical, useful tool for our everyday life. A useful tool that brings major questions for mankind. And I would really wish to address to our two panelists, as well as to Professor de Santos, on how do you see AI as a crucial tool in a period of exhaustion of natural resources, in a period of limitations connected to the errors mankind did above all over the last century. How do you see that AI will serve mankind in a positive way? So I would give the floor first to Margaret, then to Nuria, and then to close our session to Professor Manuel de Santos. Margaret.
Thank you. I think it's been a very interesting discussion, and evidently AI has been developing the last more than 50 years, and has been in different stages, you know, more imagination, and now it is more applicable in the application using the big data. And the big data, like Nuria said, is the key factor to train the algorithms. And so if we don't have the data, we cannot train, and it's not useful. You can invent lots of things, lots of algorithms. So in order for Europe to be able to gather the big data, I think that we all know this GDPR process, and we know the data protection laws, and but you know, at the end, I think that we have to come up with the possibility of gathering the data and use the data to train, and this is key issue for me. I think that Europe, in order to take off for this artificial intelligence ecosystem to take off, it has to have some infrastructure. Data is one of it, and of course the connected network and the consensus of all the issues on. For each country, there are differences, but we have to eliminate in the maximum measure, you know, the differences for Europe to have the infrastructure, and of course, you know, AI, we have to make it to contribute to the equality, to contribute to the improvement of human life experience, and to eliminate, you know, the problem that we have, and to prevent the dangers that if we don't regulate well, and that companies, if you know, just try to make the biggest profit, then it can happen, you know, it can go to such a way that we don't deserve, you know, to have. And so I think that these are the issues that Europe needs to consider now. And we are still in the last development, which is the takeoff period we're still in the very beginning era, which I believe, So I think that we have all, the future for us to decide, and we need to be wise, and we need to take advantage of AI instead of suffering from AI.
Thank you very much, Margaret, for these splendid words that really help us clarifying. I would give the floor now to Nuria.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I have much more new to say from what I have already said. I don't know if maybe Professor De Santis, we want to give a chance to Professor De Santis to speak, and maybe I can complement, just because in the interest of time, it might be interesting to have another voice to the debate, and then I can add up to that.
Manuel.
Thank you, Nuria. Thanks
Yes.
very much. I didn't want to take the floor because I was listening so attentively. It has been fascinating. Suddenly, more than 1 hour has passed. Yeah. So now we are coming little by little to an end. The conference starts in 10 minutes, and it's time to conclude, and also to come to some final reflections, along the question of Laurent. My feeling is that artificial intelligence brings us clearly to a change of era. For millenniums, human beings have been evolving in a linear way, in an arithmetical way. The way we understand the world, the way we make laws, the way we have built our society, including our democratic societies, the way we exchange with other people, the way we approach this pandemic isn't rooted into a system where the world changes arithmetically. It means society changes, but we always have time to react. Suddenly, when internet came, well, internet was another exponential change, like Gutenberg one, but from Gutenberg to the next, 300 years passed until the first industrial revolution, let's say. Yeah? Instead, right after the arrival of internet, human beings started communicating to each other and promoting more data. So internet means an exponential acceleration of data. Then the social networks meant a second exponential increase of exponential of data. Then suddenly our avatar, our mobile phone, geolocalize us, and then multiplied again exponentially the data. Internet of Things came and did the same. The machines started communicating to each other, and the machines started creating things. And then artificial intelligence arrived. Artificial intelligence is a very old issue, but for many reasons that you all know very well, exploded now. And this brought us to a complete different arena and a different scenario. I'm not so sure where we have digested clearly in our stomach, sociologically speaking, that artificial intelligence is something which affects all of us, all over the world, and that there is a huge risk of bringing the whole issue of the development of artificial intelligence as a purely business one, which will provoke, as Nuria has suggested, and develop an oligopolism, or even a monopolism, where finally the unicorns take the lead. We just need to read the books of Kai-Fu Lee to realize how things move in this direction, where certainly Europe is lost. Yeah, and we have to realize that we all are affected, that the world, our society, the way we organize our laws. I'm a lawyer. That's the way I can feel the matter from this perspective, yeah, is not adapted at all to an exponential change, which is not conjunctural, but structural. We don't go this way anymore. We go this way, and artificial intelligence is increasing and increasing and increasing this change of society. Finally, my understanding is that the only way to move forward is to foster international cooperation. We need to foster international cooperation. We need to set up international organizations, not the classic post-World War international organizations, which are quite pachydermic, Laurent. You know it very well because you have worked, and I also have worked in some of them. But we have to bring a new way of organizing ourselves as human beings. We need international corporations. This is an issue which affects all of us. And when we bring the two main issues together with, of course, with the pandemic, which means changing our world from an environmental perspective, and understanding that we have to go necessarily into revolution or digital revolution. There at the very, very heart we find artificial intelligence. This is why I feel that meetings like the one we fostered today and the one which is fostered in the conference for the next days, where so many thousand people, knowledgeable people, just develop how to develop artificial intelligence, but at the same time, because this is the topic of the conference, how to bring a human face, a human look, yeah, how to bring humanity into this world of artificial intelligence. Finally, the key issue is, and we are very far to have found an answer, how are we going to live with the machines? Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Just if I may say, because he just prepared it for me, I just wanted to mention that the ELIS unit in Alicante that we just created, the name is the Institute for Humanity-Centric Artificial Intelligence, and it's going to be precisely doing research on the topic and the intersection between artificial intelligence and humanity. So it's totally aligned with what Manuel de Santos, Professor de Santos just mentioned. Yeah. There is a need for a lot of research on that.
This is something very, very beautiful. I think this is all my warm thanks to our panelists, to Director de Santos, to Fide Foundation, and of course to ECAI for hosting us. We leave this session before the grand opening of the conference with a message, and this message is that we are AI enthusiasts, all of us, and we want AI development for a better harmony in mankind, for a better well-being in mankind, and we are working for it in our various capacities in law, business, science, university, private sector, public sector. We are all united to create a better world thanks to AI as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. And
thank
you also, Laurent. Thank you also to Cornelia, who could join as an assistant, but not as a speaker. But I'm sure she's listening us. So we wait for you, Cornelia, for the next time. Have a great conference to all of the attendants.
Thank you. Yeah, have a great conference. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.